So like we expected with the new season, we did not really get a brand new meta. Obviously, we nerfed a few different things and kind of brought things in line, didn't necessarily make anything more interesting. There are a few weapons that we can kind of throw into the mix. Obviously, we kind of have a little bit more of a hard meta that they've kind of stuck to for a while. I don't necessarily know the philosophy of it or why they do certain things. Like this particular thing, we get a prismatic blueprint for free as part of an event that's going on and to hype up BO7, which is going to have an event next week, which we'll kind of have videos on that stuff once that stuff comes out. But regardless of that, we have this cool event, but it's for the XM4 blueprint with a kind of a little bit of an off meta loadout a little bit. And the gun sucks. It's like one of the worst rifles currently within the game out of the BO6 assortment. So it's kind of like, who thought this through? Why not give the XM4 a huge buff and then give us an opportunity to use this type of thing? But regardless, let's get into the spreadsheet. So for those that have bookmarked this has been updated since the 7th. Basically, the day of the update, we pretty much did a lot of Easter egg stuff. I went through and tested all the changes that they did. Luckily, some of them were just range changes, so they weren't like dramatically impacting the meta. But overall, we were able to get all those tested and inputted, even for the new ABR in burst, full auto, and then the LMG, which the LMG kind of sucks. So I would venture away from that. We do have some fast killing guns up here. The full auto TR2, still pretty good. LC10 just gets a little bit more broad in line. It had a ridiculously fast TTK if you were incredibly accurate and you didn't get any limb shots. Unfortunately, it did get nerfed, unfortunately, because then it kind of opens the door for a few other options and trade-offs. I think most people will probably still go with the C9, even though there's a few options that kill faster. The C9 kind of strikes that perfect balance between accuracy, fire rate, damage per mag, all those various things, while still being a pretty solid option that you can use at medium range. Versus I think the compact, Ladra, PPSH may struggle in some of those areas. The full auto TR2, interesting. And then the SOG, which I've enjoyed this whole time. KSV still in the mix. And so is the LC10. So you got a ton of options to choose from. If you go 8 attachment builds, you get the Krakova. We do have the mid-range. You can kind of see the 40-meter range. Obviously, you can go a little bit further or a little bit closer, depending on what you're looking at. FFAR is still killing the fastest overall and up close. We do have a couple different options like the GPR, a great sniper support with that 588 TTK up close, even though it does have a little bit slower in that mid-range. That doesn't happen until about 49 meters, so you don't really have to worry necessarily about that particular damage TTK beyond 38 meters, so you can see where that goes up to. So a lot of great options there to kind of mix it up depending on if you're going to be playing big map Verdansk or small map Resurgence, and it gives you those options. Then we got the sniper support. You can already kind of expect what the loadouts we're going to be covering today. And one of the things I'll point out, because I know a lot of people are hyper gassed up on this ABR A1 and burst fire, and one of the things that I usually like to try and factor into the different criteria when I'm rating a gun and where it sits in the meta is, how do you describe the weapon? And if you have to use more than one if, or even one if in describing it, then it's definitely not meta. So I'll give you an example. So people go, this ABR slaps if you don't miss any burst and if you only get upper chest shots. That's two ifs. That's definitely not a meta weapon, although it can be reliable and consistent and in the right hands. And people may enjoy it, and in some instances you might get that theoretically fast TTK. I think a lot of times when you start throwing ifs in front of things, it's kind of like cope to try and make sure a gun is particularly good. When you know that you got working with the best thing possible, you just say it's the meta. That's it. Not if you hit your shots, if it had less recoil, if it did more damage, if the person doesn't have plates, if whatever other nonsense you want to throw out there, it had more bullet velocity. So overall, it's a pretty solid option. I don't think this is hard meta by any means. I think people may enjoy it just because it's a little bit different. High skilled players may enjoy it more than the average player because of the consistency issues that it may have. But you can kind of see the build laid out there. And with this particular one, it still has a 1300 bullet velocity. You can see above the camera, which is pretty good. And then we got the TR2, which overall just kind of mixes it up. Nothing like a crazy weapon or anything. I wish it had better irons. but unfortunately it does not. So we got this created class here. You can see this gun. It has the built-in optic, which is kind of nice. With the recoil springs, you get a little bit tighter grouping on that. So you can actually challenge people, but if they're moving, some of those shots are going to miss. A little bit unforgiving with the burst weapon. And that's just kind of how that part works. And then we got the TR2, which this thing is pretty effective. It does get a little bit wobbly if you just hold the trigger a little bit too long, but overall it can delete targets. You can see it can get down to 512 TTK on that top left, but it can go up to around 600, which is kind of where it's mostly going to sit, depending on if the target's moving or whatever the case is. Still tried and true. I would put this in a very similar category. This is a great gun if you can control the recoil. And going back to that, I think it's one of those true statements that kind of helps describe a gun. I think the Ladra is just pretty good overall. If the fast fire rate isn't too punishing for you. But there's the loadout there. Pretty straightforward for the close range guns. I'm really hoping that in BO7 we'll get a little bit more build diversity in these weapons. I think BO6 made a lot of mistakes on how they determined to put these attachments. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they modify this system for the next game, because this system is inherently designed to be stale. And surprise, surprise, it got stale because there's not enough build diversity. You can't make a fast moving decked out gun, and you can't do a low recoil stacked out gun quite the same as we used to be able to in some of the previous COD titles, at least since MW 2019. So AMAX is generally one of my favorites. I kind of generally go back to it. I really wish they didn't touch the recoil that like they did, because it was really in a good spot. Same with the Kilo. They went and touched that up, and I'm just not a fan of that. I think it's good overall, something different. It does have the boosted mag compared to what we originally had in MW 2019. And then the Ladra, which this little further target, not so easy to hit. Within that 13 or 14 meters, though, this thing is very solid. And the Growl, a lot of times with the nerfs, people get really like hyped or over dramatic, I guess you want to say. This got like a little bit of a range nerf, and when you tack on this here, the range is 38 meters and 50 meters, so you're getting the damage drop off up to about the second damage drop off most of the time. It still has great iron sights. That's really all they changed with it. In terms of its effective TTKs are still relatively the same. And then the SOG, this one got buffed, so it's actually even better than it was before, so it kind of crept up that power ranking in my opinion, but I already liked it before, so W. Another gun to use. So we use that ported compensator just because it helps with that initial bullet kick, so you can allow you to stay on target a little bit easier. If you use the compensator, it's still a pretty good attachment, but it can be a little bit tricky to stay on target because that initial bullet can end up going like enough to get you off target. And then, like I said, the SOG, pretty good. Gives me those BO4 vibes that I'm a fan of. Then we got the GPR, which has a little bit of slow reload. That's one of my biggest drawbacks with it. Overall, I do like the weapon. I still think the Cypher is superior over it. I think there are some niche cases where maybe you'd use this over the other, but they're generally pretty close, but the Cypher still kind of edges out the GPR in my opinion. Pretty similar loadout that we're accustomed to using. And then the LC10, although it did get nerfed, it just lost that broken TTK and moved more in line with that 600 milliseconds, which is in line with pretty much every SMG. But since it has a lot of the other intangibles that you're looking for in SMG, plus good recoil, it makes it still a pretty solid weapon that you can be accurate with, especially if you're medium to low skilled, you're going to be able to hit your shots. So GPR, pretty straightforward gun. Doesn't have a ton of recoil. I think, again, the biggest problem is the reload is a little bit slow, especially if you're taking on multiple targets. But yeah, this gun's still pretty good. Overall, going to be easy to use. Like I mentioned in the patch note video, they didn't change the recoil on this thing, so still pretty consistent. It's just in some instances, other guns may kill faster, and that could be an issue, but I guess you got to try it out and see where it goes from there. And then the Cypher, which we've had for quite a while, and the C9. The C9, we had it as meta, it got nerfed down, and then it got kind of buffed back up, and then other things power crept it, and then now those got nerfed, so now it's back into the mix. So Cypher, pretty straightforward build. You can do 8 attachments if you want. Recoil springs, bullet velocity stuff, rear grip stock and laser don't really matter. And I wish we really could just run 6 attachments and then that would be call it a day. But we're not there. We won't be there, I guess, for a while. And then the normal build we've had forever for the C9. Cypher, pretty easy to use. And this is like what they're using mainly in comp. I know they do have a couple other options that they can use as well, but that's kind of the main go-to. And then, like I said, this one's relatively low recoil, good movement, good mag damage per mag. Bullet velocity, all those intangibles that you want in SMG, it's pretty solid. So let me know kind of what your thoughts. I'm still looking forward to seeing what we get to find out at Gamescom on the 19th. And then we should have a ton of news around the next game. And obviously Battlefield beta is going on if people are interested in that. So see you on the next one. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.